Welcome everybody to MOHAI tonight. We're here for a special program. I'm Mary Ellie. I'm the Director of Annual Giving and Membership here, and we're just so happy that you've joined us. I'm a brown woman with dark brown hair sitting in front of a photo of MOHAI. The program will last a little over an hour, and on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toolbar. This is where you can access the chat box and Q&A box. Enter your questions at any time throughout the program, and we'll respond to all questions at the end of the program. Email program@MOHAI if you're calling in for questions, or use chat for other comments. Closed captioning can be turned on and off from the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. During the program, all attendees are muted, but you can share your comments in the chat box. Be sure to select all attendees and panelists so that everyone can see your message. Myself and our team member colleague, Kelsey Novick, will be here behind the scenes to respond to your chat and email questions. I just want to take a minute to extend my gratitude to everyone in attendance for your ongoing support of MOHAI through your membership and gifts throughout the past year. It's meant so much to us, and it's helped us sustain the museum for a challenging time for everyone. And now it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Artist Talk with Preston Singletary and MOHAI Executive Director Leonard Garfield.
Thank you, Mary Ellie. And I just want to echo what you said, which is to welcome all of our members and to thank them for their support, and especially to thank Preston for joining us tonight. I'll be introducing Preston in just a second, but I do want to do as we always do when we start a MOHAI program, is to acknowledge that we are on the land of Indigenous people, of the Duwamish, the Suquamish, Coast Salish people. We honor their endurance, we recognize their presence and their importance to our community today. So we want to make that acknowledgement as we get started. I am very, very lucky that I get to introduce our special guest today. Preston Singletary has become associated in the art world with the relationship between European glass-blowing traditions and Northwest Native art. His artwork features themes of transformation, animal spirits, shamanism, all manifested through elegant blown glass forms and mystical sand-carved Tlingit designs. We're going to learn more about your background, Preston, but I know you learned the art of glass blowing by working with some renowned artists here in the Seattle area, including such luminaries as Benjamin Moore and Dante Marioni. You also were a student and a practitioner in Europe, and you had the opportunity to work with some of the great Venetian glass artists in Italy when you spent time there. And also for decades, you've worked with Indigenous artists, and we'll be talking about that as we go through the program tonight. Preston is internationally recognized. His work is included in museum collections, including the British Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Seattle Art Museum, of course, the Corning Museum of Glass, the Mint Museum of Art and Design in Charlotte, Heard Museum in Phoenix, and the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. It's an amazing array of the best art institutions in the world. Preston maintains an active schedule. He teaches, he lectures, he exhibits all over the place. Some of the major exhibits that I've been privileged to see include the Museum of Glass show in Tacoma, entitled Preston Singletary, Echoes, Fire, and Shadows. And in 2018, he launched a new traveling exhibit in collaboration with the Museum of Glass titled Raven and the Box of Daylight, which really pushes the boundary of glass as a medium for storytelling. And I want to talk about that. And before I ask the first question, Preston, and welcome you officially, I also know that you are a musician and like a rock musician, kind of. So you're an art star, you're a rock star. Thank you, Preston, for joining us tonight. Hey, we're a history museum. So I got to start with this first question, which isn't on my script, and I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this. But what is the formative story of Preston Singletary? Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? And how did you get in those very early years? How did you become an artist?
Well, I was born in San Francisco, but my parents are from Seattle. They moved down there. I was born. Before I was a month old, we returned to Seattle. So I'm basically a Seattleite. Been here my whole life. I had, two occasions where my mailing address would have been outside of Seattle. 3 months in Juneau, Alaska, when I was 17, turning 18, and then 6 months in Stockholm, Sweden, where I met my wife. And that was in 1993. Other than that, I've always lived here. I've always never found a great reason to leave. Everything that I was involved with was happening here between music and the glass art that I kind of rather fell into at age 19. I started working at the Glass Eye Studios, which is a studio that's still in existence. It's changed owners a couple times, but it was a production factory. I spent about 3 years there working on the fundamentals and making production wear. And then I shifted over to the studio of Benjamin Moore, who I have to mention, unfortunately, we lost Benjamin about a little over a week ago. And that's been quite a shocking thing for the entire glass community. But anyways, I spent 20 years working with Benjamin in his studio as an assistant, but on the side, I would develop my own work in various ways. Usually on the weekends, the assistants, we would get an opportunity to blow glass for ourselves. I attended the Pilchuck Glass School in 1984. And I'd been up there intermittently, for the past, since 1984 till I just was up there about 3 weeks ago doing a residency. So that's really where I learned how artists work with glass. Essentially, I was able to be exposed to this international community of glass artists that, came from all over the world, and we had the good benefit of being exposed to them and learning different sensibilities of how to work with glass. And I experimented while I was up there, and I basically started dabbling in the form line design, which was what the type of design work that you kind of see behind me. We call that form line, and that's kind of anthropological term, but that's what the style that the name's been given. So it's all based on Tlingit design, and that's my family background. It's a matrilineal society. I come from the eagle moiety. I come from the killer whale clan. The brown bear and the wolf are also symbols that represent my family. And so, it's a long story to tell, but essentially, after I got married in 1995, I really decided I had better start, working on something a little more. I was trying to maintain a music career simultaneously while working with all these incredible glass artists, but I started to focus on the native design work very seriously in about 1997, 98, and then I started to have shows with the work, and people instantly kind of recognized that this was something a little more personal, a little deeper. And so I started to make connections with collectors and selling my work, and just grew from there.
It's an amazing story. And you talk about your family and your traditional connections, but I think, Preston, I read somewhere that it was your grandparents in particular that inspired you in an appreciation and an understanding of Indigenous culture and your own personal heritage. What was your relationship with your grandparents, and what did you learn from them?
Well, it was actually my great grandmother who moved down from Sitka, Alaska to Seattle in 1923. So from that point forward, the entire family grew up in this region. And my grandmother, or my great grandmother, was it was a prearranged marriage, which was tradition at the time, at the turn of the century. She was widowed in 1919, and then she met a Filipino man named Dionisio Gubitayo, and she married him and brought the entire family to Seattle. My grandmother, Lillian Gubitayo, she married a Filipino man as well.
Mm.
So my mother is actually half Filipino, half Tlingit. So technically, we're Tlingitinos. And and my father is, mixed European, Scotch, Irish, English, German, Norwegian, French. So he's quite mixed up. And so I grew up with, it was my great uncle who was the half Filipino man and half Tlingit, that child of my great grandmother, who recorded a lot of these stories, wrote them down, transcribed them. And so those were inspirational to me. And of course, our family was connected to the tribal community, and did a lot of functions within the Filipino community as well as the Native community. And so that was something, but I grew up fairly urban, wanted to be a rock musician. And so I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it. I mean, it was part of my background, but then over time, it really started to speak more loudly to me. And so I endeavored to start to develop the work that I do today.
Yeah. Your initial work, Preston, you were a student at Pilchuck initially, as well as, of course, becoming an instructor and a guest lecturer and so forth. In those early experiences at Pilchuck, you were trained and learning in the great European tradition of glass art. Is that correct? And how did that feel to a young guy from other traditions who is also a rock musician?
Well, when I came into glass blowing, there wasn't a big community in Seattle, although it started to grow, really just prior to that time, 1982. And today it's quite robust, the whole community. Because I didn't go to college, I didn't go to higher education beyond high school, I ended up falling into glass blowing through the introduction of Dante Marioni, who's a good friend of mine. We started to work together very intensively. And, at the time it gave me the ability to work with my hands, which I wouldn't say I was especially gifted at it in the beginning, but I stuck with it. And then I had these opportunities to work with really exceptional people. And I learned a lot about technique and aesthetic and process and style and all of this. And so the early work I did was more reflective of the kinds of people that I was working with. Like Benjamin Moore was, very, very, had a very high aesthetic in terms of his style and his sense of design, which was far different than, the hippie movement, making, really funky things and being really loose with it. And then, Benjamin brought the Italians, the Europeans over. He was the artistic director of Pilchuck for 20 years. So he made a motion out to the Europeans and brought them over and exposed us all to very, special and almost secret techniques that we were able to adopt and sort of change and synthesize for our own purposes, our own aesthetic and style. And eventually I got much more into sculpture, where I'm more manipulating the glass out of the round, less vessel oriented and more sculptural. So that's kind of how I felt about it. It was really, I felt very privileged to be working with these, amazing people, but they were all my friends, Richard Royal and, Dante and Benjamin. We in turn worked for Dale Chihuly, and, because Benjamin was very close with Benjamin or with Chihuly. So I had that exposure too. Wasn't, it was never full time, but, it got in there somehow, the influences.
Yeah. And I think, Preston, am I right that Old Chuck turns 50 this year?
That's correct. Yeah, 50 years of in existence. Yep.
So it's an amazing history and an amazing gift to the Northwest. You've brought a couple of slides for us to look at this evening. And I thought maybe as we go through the conversation, show us a couple of pieces of work and we'll talk about those, and maybe I'll ask you some unrelated questions. But
yep. Well, this is a public art piece that was made for an apartment down in Portland. It's 20 feet tall, water jet cut steel and glass, and it's illuminated from inside. So at night it has a really beautiful glow to it.
Wow. How many people are on your team to physically create that work, including the engineering and electrical people and all the rest of it?
So, most of the public arts are very new direction for me at the moment. And I work collaboratively with a guy named David Franklin, and we work together developing these ideas, and he kind of does a lot of the footwork. In my studio, so generally with this kind of thing, we work with contractors who execute, the details, in their fabrication studio. In my own studio, my particular, my studio that I call my studio, I have 4 employees. So working on various aspects of the steps that I take to make each piece. So this one is, a collaborative effort with David. We work with contractors and hire structural engineers and figure out how to make all this come together. So it's kind of a new direction, learning a lot along the way.
What neighborhood in Portland is that located in?
This is in the Pearl District. So you can see it's right next to Blick, the art.
Right, the art supply store.
Yeah, so it's about 11th and Glisson, I want to say, or somewhere right around there. Yep.
Let's go to the next one.
So this is this one actually relates to my my great grandmother. This is a piece that I made in collaboration with a wood carver who was actually one of my first mentors, David Svensson, who spent many years up in Alaska working with Tlingit carvers and learning the tradition of the wood carving with adzes and hook knives and what have you. So this is a story of my great grandmother who had a pet grizzly bear as a child, and so you can see the top figures got the grizzly bear cub, and kind of in a short version of the story, it was like she had this little cub that some of the family was out hunting in the Sitka, right in the village of Sitka. They shot a bear. They found these little cubs rooting around. So they brought one back, or they brought these cubs back to the village, and my great grandmother raised it as a pet. And as we all know, bears have a sweet tooth. And at that time, there was a lot of Russians in Sitka, and a woman that made saltwater taffy, apparently. So my great grandmother would go out to pick berries so she could sell them, so she could get Russian money to buy taffy for her pet. And so this is kind of an extension of tradition. Typically a totem pole tells a story. It's a visual language, and so it more or less requires a narration about what it symbolizes. And so this particular one has the eagle crest, or the eagle moiety, the killer whale crest on the blanket design, which you can't see too clearly, and so forth. And this is actually cast glass. So this is a lost wax casting, if you're familiar with that kind of process. So it involves taking a piece of sculpture and then making a series of molds, and then eventually you have a wax positive. You create a plaster around the positive, you melt the wax out, and then you load it with glass, and then you fire it, and the glass basically melts into the negative space, and then once you remove the plaster, then you have this sculpture more or less. But it's actually it takes more or less a year to fabricate this because, you know, with the mold making process, sometimes the plaster breaks very slightly and then glass will seep through. And then you have to spend a lot of time grinding the detail back into the form. There's two
Absolutely beautiful.
that's-
Let's take a look at the next one.
Mhm. So this is the exhibition Raven in the Box of Daylight. This was kind of a culmination of working with another Tlingit elder named Walter Porter, who passed away unfortunately in about 2013 or so. And so Walter worked with me. You know, he was really fascinated with my the work that I was doing, and in particular the Raven pieces that I'd made with the ball, you know, kind of tucked into the mouth of the Raven. And so he asked me about it, and he started to share with me his information about it. So he considered himself a mythologist. He considered himself, you know, a storyteller, and he was a very amazing person, very captivating, you know, in his way of sharing these stories with people. He had basically kind of, I call him the Tlingit Joseph Cornell. He was kind of drawing parallels from different you know, mythologies and theologies, and basically you know, identifying the symbolism behind it. And so unfortunately, he passed away before we had the time to, you know, complete, you know, the exhibition. So I worked with another curator who was also Tlingit and Zuni Pueblo, but she's a tenured professor at the University of Washington today. Her name is Miranda Bellardi Lewis, and she so she helped me with kind of contextualizing the whole show and analyzing different stories of Raven. So there's several different versions of the Raven in the Box of Daylight. And so I created this kind of an immersive experience of walking through the thread of the story. And
This is amazing. And this is a traveling exhibit.
That's correct. Yeah, it's going to open up at the Smithsonian at the National Museum of the American Indian in January 2021. And then beyond that, it'll go to the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk.
In Norfolk.
Yeah.
No, you said January 2021. Do you mean it has opened? It has opened, or do you mean 2022?
Yeah, next January.
2022. That's going to be an absolute, you know, something on everybody's itinerary, because that's going to be amazing. I wanted to read you something and ask you to reflect on this. You wrote, Preston, that the visual language of Indigenous people is very unique and powerful, and it has connections to ancient codes and symbols of the land. And I'm wondering, as a modern artist in a very individualistic society, working within a tradition that's a very communitarian cultural tradition, how do you find that as an artist in working with these symbols and codes which have their own embedded meaning, and then you bring into it your individual vision as an individual artist of the 21st century?
Well, I think I do that with the material. First off, you know, glass is not traditional, but I do like to point out, you know, that the glass has a defining historic connection to Native culture, which came through trade beads. You know, so if you know, fast forward, it's now we're sort of taking control of the making of the glass and shaping of the you know, this artwork. And so yeah, that's a broad question in terms of intellectual property. which is a huge issue or topic, within the Alaska Native community, because all of these symbols basically connect back to family lineages. Some of them are more in the public domain, and some of them are very much like property, considered property. Songs, dances, stories, specific designs that are, historically known and have been preserved. So essentially, what I learned through Walter Porter was that you can share these symbols in, for the most part, if you're knowledgeable and you understand, the context in which they come down to us. And, and the fact is that these stories are really have a universal meaning to them. You think about Raven in the Box of Daylight. Raven is going to bring us out of the darkness and into the light. So it's like Walter loved to quote theology because he said, I just want to say that I don't want to think that people can hog Jesus all to themselves. So he would say, Jesus is the light, I am the light. So this kind of duality of dark and light, within the context of the Raven story is also, there's messages of forgiveness, there's messages of, this transformation, there's immaculate conception, the daughter becomes pregnant, she doesn't have a husband. So, but it's really Raven that's, inside of her and transforming, she gives birth to him in a form of a human child. There's symbolism of water. There's symbolism, that is all very universal. And when we look at it universally, it's easy to be able to make the argument that this information should be shared. And so that's what I really learned from Walter.
Wow, that's the parallels that's so striking between all these spiritual traditions. Let's look at a few more images. Kelsey, are we able to have the next?
Yeah, this one I made a version of this for an exhibition that I had past spring. And it was kind of an homage to my father, who was a great outdoorsman. He worked for Boeing for most of his life, but then he also was a fly fisherman and, a mountain climber, from rock climbing, snow climbing, glacier climbing. He lived here in the Northwest his whole life. And so this was kind of my way of creating a mythology around him. So, he passed away in November of last year on election night, auspiciously enough. And so he'd been fighting lung cancer for the past year or so. So we knew it was coming, but, and then, so what I did is I quickly pivoted to turning all of the work that I was making into a story about him getting on the river, because he loved to float the Stillaguamish River. And so I made this piece kind of as an homage to him and his connection to nature. So you can see the river in the, kind of splitting between the two figures there. You've got a eagle kind of peering over and, checking him out.
Wow. What did your father think of you becoming an artist when you were 19?
I think in the end, he was quite, he was very impressed with what I had accomplished, with all of this. And I think that, he always, he lived up by Green Lake, and so he would always come out to the exhibitions and and keep tabs on what I was doing musically or with art. And so, yeah, I think, so for me, it was an amazing way of processing the loss of him, kind of, he was on my mind constantly as I was trying to figure out how I could make objects that might relate to his life in some way, or kind of tell the story of how he lived, on the river and in the mountains. That was his passion. Boeing was just a means to an end for him.
Yeah. There's such a sense of movement in that piece. You can feel the spirit of your dad, I think.
It's kind of a little bit of a pictorial
Yeah.
style that I've been developing, and it's kind of interesting. I like playing with that. Again, just after a while, you have to kind of try new things and reinvent yourself. So this was kind of a direction that I've been going.
Yeah. You said something a little bit earlier before we go to the next image, that many indigenous art traditions require a narration to fully understand what each of the symbols means. We're so used to, in contemporary culture, to bring our own interpretation to everything. Here's an artwork that is an homage to your dad, and yet each of us will feel something from that, and it will reflect in different ways. How do you feel as an artist? Do you want people to have this sort of written narrative that explains it? Do you want people to bring their own interpretation, or is it a melding of those two approaches?
Well, so what I've been trying to do is give the pieces kind of, poetic titles. Morning Fog on the River. It's just how this piece turned out, because the top section of the glass, is experimenting with how to make the glass fade from one color to another, which is a technique I just haven't exploited too much. And, with the surface color, it allowed me to, to create this contrast. And so when it came out very murky and almost, kind of, slightly opaque, I decided, that's how I try to create a distinction. So I try to make things a little different, or change up my way of thinking around it.
Your color is beautiful. Let's have the next slide, Kelsey.
Yeah, so this is a brand new piece. This was similar, I made another similar piece. So I'm kind of in this theme. Sometimes I'll work, in groups of 2 or 3. And, so you can see the arc of this, post. It almost looks like a fishing pole, right? So, and then also I've been I consider myself very influenced by modernist art movement. And it's something that I like to play with in terms of, kind of turning the tables on the modernists, whereas modernism led to primitivism. Primitivism was basically the modernists reflecting on older, I like to call them non-technological cultures. And there's a great exhibition that was at the Museum of Modern Art, called Primitivism, and it kind of analyzed and broke down the connections that the modernists, such as Picasso, Henry Moore, and Gauguin, and all these artists were looking at Native American art, oceanic art, African art. It's very well known that Picasso was inspired by African art, sculpture, and sometimes in the paintings. And so, what I read, when I got a hold of that catalog called Primitivism, it was fascinating because it gave me a lot of insight to artist thought process, and the fact that they felt these modernists, it was written in this catalog saying that they felt that their work was disempowered, because it was, due to being created for the commercial market, whereas African art, Native American art had this sense of ceremony, or it was, you were able to use it to some degree. was also kind of made to explain man's connections to the cosmos. And so that was um, something I really got a lot out of, and so I started to look at modernist art, and this, of course, this is inspired by Calder, the mobile, or the stabilia that they, the table mounted mobiles that he made. And so I kind of enjoyed, letting those influences kind of come through my artwork. And
that's so interesting to hear. One of the things that I think everybody's inspired by when they learn about your career and the work you've done is how you've reached out to other First Nations, Indigenous artists in North America, of course, your heritage, but also globally. Talk a little bit about your work with other Indigenous artists.
Yeah. I mean, I started collaborating with artists early on. I mean, actually, glassblowing is really a collaborative process into itself. And so for me, it was natural to want to bring people into that, process and experiment. So I started working with Tammy Garcia, who's a Santa Clara Pueblo potter. The vessel forms, these pottery forms that she was doing really harkened back to my love of, classical forms, vessel forms. And I knew that her work was going to look spectacular in the glass form, have the translucency and all of that. So we made a series of pieces. We probably made, I want to say we made over 100 pieces together. We would make these pot forms, and then she would design them, and I would cut them out and sandblast them, carve the designs into them, send them back to her. And early on, the Native American art collector was a little leery of this glass material. They were, well, it's not tradition, and what's the value of this? And so, but I knew that Tammy's work was so sought after that it was gonna, turn a few heads, and it really effectively helped cross over the material of glass into the Native American collector. And so consequently, or subsequently, I've been to part of these Indigenous artist gatherings, both in Hawaii and New Zealand. So I've worked with Hawaiian artists, I've worked with Maori artists from New Zealand. I've been on a cultural art exchange where I went to Australia and interacted with some Aboriginal people. And so, each time when I work, with these artists, there's always, again, like the symbolism, getting back to that, sometimes there is something that you just don't share within the commercial market. So I'm learning all the time by working with other people, like how do they interpret their cultural art for today's world. And the fact is that a lot of in the old days, the work that was made would have been for the community, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the work that I make today is for the commercial market. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of winning people over with the artwork, but I'm also hopefully showing them something new and something different, and that something that they can learn from or appreciate on a different level. And so that's something that I think about a lot. A lot of the work that I make, it goes into other people's homes that have no connection to the culture whatsoever. But I still contend, like, if there were no good practicing working artists, there would be no good art. So the fact that I've kind of worked out my process to synthesize the designs for my through my medium, when the time came, when I was called upon by my community to make something significant, I had 20 years of experience, and I was able to make something very timely and or you know uh, uh, that looks like it's part of the cultural art, but also will last and
Mhm.
look strong.
Yeah, and I mean, your ability to bring together the contemporary and the enduring and traditional, and as you say, I mean, it has a tradition in Western art with people like Picasso and Matisse, and so different than this strictly commercial artists like the Andy Warhol tradition, where it really is about the commodification, celebrating that through art. It's such an interesting point you're making. Your work is all glass work is very tactile. It's very much about form and color and touch, even because when you look at it, you feel like you're touching it. How do you? What's your thought about color, or how does color and texture play a role in your art? Is it something you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I tend to work with color as like a duotone, more or less, like a positive, negative. Traditionally there would have been a third color introduced. In the beginning, I put a lot of constraints on myself where I wanted to work with like red and black, and
Mhm.
or blue and black, or whatever, or earth tone colors to mimic the color of wood, or cedar or alder or whatever. Um, and and then over time, I was like, you know, I have all access to all these colors, so I just started to really kind of go, you know, a little bit crazy with it, and then I was able to come up with new kinds of effects, of working with color. The texture is also something, it's like a lot of the basket forms that I work with, and some of the pieces that you have in your collection, the baskets, so I've created like a weaving pattern. So it just involves putting a vinyl tape down very methodically. So it looks like it's woven. You sandblast the texture into it, and you remove a layer, and you sandblast again, and you remove more layers, and then it kind of looks like it's kind of like like cross hatching. So
We're gonna look at that one.
yeah,
Kelsey, let's have the next slide. We have a couple questions too, Preston, that I want to get to from. This is such an incredibly beautiful piece, and I wonder about how it seems to be luminous internally as well as
yeah,
externally.
yeah.
Would you be willing to outline the process of how this piece, Safe Journey, came into being? You've talked about some of the techniques, some of the conceptual ideas.
Yeah.
What's the journey of Safe Journey?
So this was working together with an artist or fabricator out of Portland, and so I basically brought my question to him, or can he help me make this chest form? So these are typically made out of uh, wood. They're sort of curved and bent, steamed into the rectangular shape, and then carved or painted. In this case, I carved a design into the form, and in this particular one, I those two lights that you see, they're actually kind of like toys that project kind of a constellation. And in some cases, these pieces are um, burial boxes
Mhm.
or storage boxes. And so I put these lights in there. I wanted to create like a galaxy inside of it.
Wow.
And so it kind of created two hotspots, but if you're looking at the piece, then you see like this subtle kind of spinning of stars and color and light and stuff. So um, what it came to symbolize for me in the end was, um, kind of the idea of a burial box, but a safe journey for my father. And it's like my father and his father, my grandfather, he was very close to. So the two of them kind of there as lights.
Wow, that is really, really remarkable and beautiful. You've talked about the influence of your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather and grandmother we heard about. Who is a young artist right now that none of us maybe have heard of that you're keeping your eye on that we should be aware of?
Oh, gosh, there's a lot of women out there. Ryan Feddersen is doing really great work. There is a bit of a movement, of younger contemporary Native artists that are out there. There's a fellow that I work with collaboratively with my music named Nahan. He's a tattoo artist. He's doing like traditional, kind of reviving the tattoo tradition, of Tlingit style. And we're playing music together. Let's see gosh.
But no, that's
drawing a blank, but there's
no. That was an unfair question. But it's so interesting to hear you talk about the young people you are working with, because Preston, you're probably forever young, but you're becoming a legend in your own right? So people are looking to you as being a mentor, and I know that mentorship is important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have the next slide, Kelsey? Because I think this is very special to us.
There you go.
Preston, we are so honored and truly humbled by the fact that you very, very generously, and we were just so blown away, as you know, when you donated three Tlingit baskets to MOHAI for our permanent collection, and they are in display right now. Can you tell me a little bit about these?
Well, yeah, I was happy to make the gift to MOHAI. I think it's an incredible institution. I was kind of dismayed when it moved from the previous location, but I was really overjoyed to see that the current location is just an amazing space. I mean, you guys are I'm glad that you guys are there because to make use of that beautiful building. So this is a collection that I had. I thought that they looked very good together, because of the opal glass. These are all based on traditional Tlingit baskets. They are things that I've basically studied through looking at basketry books. And it's also to say that a lot of these designs were created, this sort of Greek key patterns and things like that are some of the older basket designs. I've looked at them and studied them and figured out, all of the information that was assigned to them. The red one that is on my right, I think it's on your right too. That's kind of considered a butterfly pattern. But at the point of contact, in the age of contact, a lot of baskets were made for the tourist trade, essentially. Yeah. And so in some cases, they didn't have any particular symbolism or meaning behind them, but they were just kind of the geometry. But I have a lot of fun, playing with those geometric patterns and how they break down mathematically and how you can wrap them around, the circumference of the piece. And so it's become kind of I don't know, sort of an object that I offer that is, it's a little more affordable than some of the more large pieces, the more exclusive pieces. And so I get a lot of joy out of making these and like to have them around. And when I get, a whole pile of them, I can see how they relate to each other and kind of have a little bit of a dialogue. And so that's why these pieces ended up together and in your collection.
Oh, they're just fantastic. And they are actually on view right now. We have a couple of questions I just want to get to really quickly. One very specific question is, how tall is letting the wind carry? What's the dimension height-wise?
How tall is?
Letting the wind carry.
Oh, it's about 23, 24 inches tall by, I want to say, yeah, probably like 24 inches wide. You know, the arc of those pieces and how they kind of extend into the air. Yeah. And then overall, it's probably about 12 inches in diameter, you know, with the main sculptural piece, blown glass form is yeah, probably about 18 inches by 5 inches wide.
And people are asking, Preston, where can they see your work in Seattle? I know you have a gallery, you have a studio, you're represented in museums.
Yeah.
Where are some places people can go?
Well, Traver Gallery is my main gallery. They're located on Union Street, right across from the Seattle Art Museum, on the second floor above where Cafe Aladro is. We'll probably come back, we hope. Anyways, I also have some representation of Stonington Gallery as well as Steinbrook Gallery in the market. They're both native art galleries, and so I have a little bit of work, you know, kind of a smaller selection of work in both of those galleries as well.
Yeah. And then somebody's asked, is there any intersection between your art and your music?
There is. The music that I do is actually also connected to the cultural kind of, it's kind of like the musical version of my art, my other mode of artistic expression. And so I work collaboratively with other Native people. We are about 6 natives. There's 4 Tlingit, 1 Haida woman, and a Blackfoot. Our guitar player is Blackfoot. And then we work collaboratively with jazz musicians, and
wow.
our band is called Kuik, which means potlatch in the Tlingit language.
Wow. How do you spell that, Preston?
Yeah. Why don't I type?
How do you spell that? Or,
type it in. I'm gonna type in the website.
Okay, type it into the chat or whatever. Wow, because I think people want it. There it is.
Yeah.
People will want to come hear you.
Yeah, it's you know, it is, for me, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You know, I worked collaboratively with all of the members, but I had the good fortune of working with this rock musician named Bernie Worrell, who is the co-founder of Parliament Funkadelic, and he was
Wow.
an amazing keyboard player, very funk oriented, but classical. I mean, he played all styles of music. And so I met him. I met Bernie when I turned 50 a couple of years ago, and paid into a Kickstarter where he came and he played for my birthday, level that I paid into. And then we got to know each other, and he expressed interest in collaborating with me. And then we make vinyl LPs with a digital download, and it's also available through Bandcamp and iTunes and all of that stuff. But or you can go directly to the website, and I can send vinyl LPs. And with that vinyl LP, you get the artwork, which is kind of cool, but then you get a digital download, so you can import it into your computer and stuff like that.
Oh, that is so cool. And that website's really easy to find. And I think is it PrestonSingletary.com, or what is it, Preston?
Oh, it's KHUEEX.
Oh, it's that website. Okay.
Yeah, that's the music website.
Okay, that's the music website. Yeah. What's your website? Your art website?
PrestonSingletary.com. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so that's you know, we have a pretty active blog and stuff, keep people up to date on everything. But really it's Facebook and Instagram. We're always posting on there. For people who would like to keep in touch, you can go to Preston Singletary Glass on Facebook, and then we're always updating, events and shows and what have
That's
you.
cool. People are checking in right now. Lori has a really specific question. This will be our getting close to our last question. Have you ever thought about getting inspiration from the traditional use of obsidian or other natural glass types?
I had there was an artist that was at Pilchuck when I was there a couple weeks ago, who came from Northern California, which was a volcanic region. They had a lot of obsidian in their territory, and she was really interested in what she could do with it. And I know that material is very, very brittle, and so it might have similar kind of working properties, but I understand that it's so brittle that when you go to heat it up, it kind of breaks apart, and almost kind of just in shards, really. So I think you might be able to reform it. I just haven't had any access to it to see what you could do with it, but I know that it's it's a little it's a little less stable than the glass that we work with, because we work with glass that has a lot of soda lime in it, which makes it very viscous, and we can shape and manipulate it. And then some of the casting that we do, where we kiln form the glass into molds or whatever, that's often done with like a lead crystal. So the lead crystal also makes it very, very soft, easy to heat up and cool in a controlled way.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. I can't let you go without asking you to talk a little bit about the incredible artwork that you're sitting in front of, because I'm sure somebody is wondering what that's the most beautiful thing. Yeah. And it's here in our region, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a piece that was in my grand hall here. Just, in my living room. You can tell it's a virtual picture. This was an exhibition that I made, or a piece that was for an acquisition / exhibition at the Museum of Glass. And this is multi-panes of glass, or panels of glass that have been handmade. And they are made with a layer of black colored glass on one surface. So we call it flash glass. That's what we call it in the glass making process. And so the mural is basically drawn across these multiple panels, and then the stencil is applied, and I'll cut out the stencil accordingly with an X-Acto blade, exposing the areas that are going to be carved. And basically, most everything that I do is sandblasted. So you're basically sweeping a nozzle of pressurized aluminum oxide, and it's a really good cutting agent against the glass. And so the stencil material holds the line, so the black line. At one point, all these panels were black, and so I carved through the layer of black to expose the color underneath. And the two pieces on the left and right are referred to as house posts, and those are more or less a lost wax casting. So we got two of them. The circles that you see, can't see them very close, but they're different design work. And one's an eagle and one's a killer whale.
This very ancient iconography, these very contemporary methods and methodologies, you bring it all together, and it's really amazing. And I just can't thank you enough, Preston, for joining us tonight, but really beyond that, for what you've done for our community in so many ways. And we're deeply honored to have you. Marielle, do you need to come back to wish us a good night, or should I close this out?
Go ahead and close us out, Leonard.
All right, I'll do it. That's the voice of Marielle. Preston, you're remarkable. And people want to know, what is your next big project. Let me just say one thing, Climate Change Arena. I think that you're working on that, are you not?
That's true. There's a public art piece that will be installed for the arena. That's going to be happening in the fall,
Wow.
October, November, I believe. So yeah, the public art thing is kind of, yeah, a little bit, other projects on the horizon. If anybody gets down to Santa Fe, I have a gallery down there, and there's an exhibition in the third week of August at Blue Rain Gallery. So that's the next exhibition that's coming up, and you can find them, blueraingallery.com. And that's where I have a lot of work that's going down there, probably about 15 to well, actually maybe as many as 20 pieces that are going to be at that show, new pieces.
Wow, that's exciting too. So some really important things to look forward to. Thank you, Preston. Thank you for your donation to MOHAI, for being with us tonight. Now, I also want to thank all of our members who have joined us tonight. We have a great new exhibit opening up in late July, the 31st, The Inventions of Leonardo da Vinci. He was a great artist. We know that. He was also an amazing, inventive person whose genius is reflected in a lot of the things that we take for granted today, began as prototypes in the brain of Leonardo da Vinci. So we'll be sharing that amazing story with our community starting on July 31st. And it's all possible really because of you, your members and your supporters and your dear friends. So thank you to Preston, to all of you for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week. The museum is open, and we look forward to seeing you there very soon. So again, thank you, Preston. Thank you, Marielle and Kelsey, for your support. And thank you, everyone. Good night.
All right. Good night.